Welcome to the Ashraf Garda Show.
So I speak to you now from Maverick Studio, which is where I record my podcasts for the Ashraf Garda Show and some of the Champion South Africa podcasts as well. What that means is it's the first time I've been here for just almost a month. So I haven't been here for this period because, as you should know, that I was COVID positive. At that stage, 150,000 other South Africans were COVID positive like myself. Since then, in this 3 or 4 weeks, those numbers have shot up to beyond 400,000. So, firstly, because you're probably wondering, how am I? I'm fine. Thank goodness for that. We're in isolation, myself and my wife, for 2 weeks, and then even out of isolation, spent lots of time resting beyond that. But I can say overall, both of us are fine, no real complications, and we're very grateful for that because, as you know, many other people have complications and they really, really struggle. So it gets me thinking about the time when it all started, and I thought I'll just share my own thoughts with you. At around 5 o'clock on the morning of July the 1st, my wife sent a message on our house group to my children, and I mean this is what she said. I'm going to read this. She says, "Guys, I need advice, please. Daddy has a very high fever. His throat was a bit sore yesterday, and after the soccer, he was shivering. I don't know what to do." And the emoji she's got is of the emoji with tears, right? And I think that emotional connection sums it all up when people find out that they are COVID positive. In this case, my wife finding out or thinking that I may possibly be COVID positive. So the anxiety that went through herself and then my children when she messaged them, well, I can only imagine, because at that time, I don't really know. I didn't even see that message until much later on. At 5 a.m. on that morning, what was I doing? I was fast asleep, but with this burning hot fever. And she had told me that. She said, "Ashraf, do you know you are burning hot?" And yes, reflecting on the previous night that I had some cold shivers, and the previous day or two where I had some croaking of the throat, the alarm bells rang immediately to say, there could be a problem. I think you don't think at that stage where it's come from. I honestly believe when people are diagnosed as positive, like the dumbest question you can ask them first up is like, where did you get it from? Because it could be one of many possibilities for other people, but also for myself. There could be 3-4 potential scenarios. But at that stage, it's not about where you got it from. It's like, do you have it? And what happens next? So what happens next for me is laying in bed, but being reasonably composed, because I am, with regard to issues of crisis or crises. But in the early part of the morning, like after 7 or 8 o'clock, I contacted the doctor, Dr. Jakub Asak, who's a former neighbor of mine, then has certainly treated me, but a good friend of mine, squash partners, and a whole lot of other things. So we're really good mates. And he is also currently the president of the Islamic Medical Association. So I thought, you know what? I mean, he's very much playing in that space right now because they would have to, create communiques around diagnosis about how people who go to worship and what needs to happen around them. So I knew he knows enough about that. But I mean, he was very clear. It's quite simple. Like, you know what? Go and get yourself tested. So I did that. Went for the test at Muller Laboratories, which are based in at Wits University, and I think it's part of a collaboration with Give to the Givers. And Munira was very, very extremely helpful to make sure that I got the results the same day. And I think after 5 o'clock of the very same day, so like 12 hours after that hint of burning heart fever, my doctor called me and he said, "Ashraf, you are positive." Often people have asked me, like, so what did you think in the period before that? And obviously, you have to think, you're laying down on your bed at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon and thinking about that you could get a call just now about being positive and what if. But I have to say, I was pretty composed about the possibilities and what may happen. I was concerned, of course, about the fact that I'm asthmatic. And as you know, COVID-19, when it gets really serious, affects your breathing in your chest, and that's when you need the ventilator. So being asthmatic naturally gave me a disadvantage over other people, which I was clearly concerned about. Anyway, around 5 o'clock, Dr. Essa called me and confirmed to say, Ashraf, you're positive. And I remember just holding on at that point, getting him to hold on and say, hold it, let me just tell my wife, because she was in the room, and told her very quickly that I was positive. She, within a couple of seconds, also messaged our house group and telling them about it too. Spoke to him for a few minutes. He gave me some thoughts about what needs to happen next. And of course, he was going to diagnose medicines and put the phone down after that, but also gave us hope that, hopefully things will be well, inshallah, or God willing. Then had some time alone with my wife, and we discussed it. Not paranoid, I must tell you, not thinking that, oh my goodness, this is the end of the world, and just freaking out. No, very, very controlled, but contemplating, what has happened, right? And then shared that information with my family, my home circle, and then decided to share it with my brother and my 2 sisters. My parents, of course, have sadly long passed on. So shared that to them with a voice note, telling them what the position is, and then sharing the same thing with the extended Garda family group on WhatsApp. So that they knew upfront what my position was, and I prayed at that stage and asked them to pray that I'm going to be well. But you never really know what's going to happen next, right? Immediately, my wife was already talking about, isolation and where I'm going to be and where she's going to have to be in another room and whatnot. Around, I think, 9 p.m. the same night, so this is like 4 hours later, I decided I needed to post this on social media. And I never thought too much about should I or shouldn't I. It was like the most obvious thing for me to do, because I'm in the media space. I've been aware of COVID-19 around the world. I've followed that beat. I've done interviews with Professor Abdul Karim around on my podcast, and you need to watch that. So I was aware, clearly about what needed to happen, but I also felt I needed to tell people about it. And I posted it to Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn as well, I think it is. And I'll tell you what, it's only after I posted it, I very quickly realized that I was in a minority of people at that stage who were very public about sharing that they are COVID positive. There were others who had shared it internally amongst their families, but very few people had been public. For me, the first person I think the first public figure who went public was Zwelinzima Vavi, the trade unionist, right? Then there were a few other people in that period. I think Shahan Ramkissoon may have just done so a few days before me as well. But Zwelinzima Vavi for me was the first South African. And when I did it, I then again realized that people were like, well, so thank you for sharing it with us. It breaks the stigma, because everybody else we know sort of holding back. And then I realized there was a responsibility to share. So having shared it, I then proceeded for the next few weeks to share my story. And I've done that using the hashtag South Africans with COVID. And then I did my first interview on SABC News. And when I chatted to Griselda Lewis about it, she emphasized that point again, that they had tried to get hold of other people to share their stories. And there was this incredible reluctance, this stigma, like as if you've done something wrong. And therefore, she was pleased that I was willing to share my story. But the point I told her then, and I'm telling this to you as well, is like, but what have you done? So I said, but what have we done? What have we done to think that what we've done is wrong? And therefore, there's a stigma attached to it. No, we're part of a global group of people now, over 15 million now, that are COVID positive, and I hope that will sort of decline. But the reality is that's where it is right now. So again, after those interviews and a few other television interviews and radio interviews, I could see again there was this massive response of people rallying towards me, and therefore this point is important for you to remember, that sharing then became a healing for the COVID positive, myself, but also a healing for the COVID negative. So for me, it was a healing because by sharing, immediately you got an incredible amount of people, diverse people, calling you, messaging you, posting on social media, sort of giving you the thumbs up, like, hey, we're with you, right? And I think that's incredibly comforting. It has to be comforting. Then for the people who are negative, I could pick it up from their thoughts that they heard what the president says about COVID-19. They heard what the Minister of Health said. They've heard what the experts like Professor Abdul Karim has said. But what about the day-to-day experiences of being COVID positive? How do you cope with that? And they wanted to hear it from people like myself. And that is why I'm saying it was a form of therapy and healing even for the COVID negative, so that if they got it, they would know what to expect. Now, I know even before I was positive, I logged onto Instagram and followed a lady by the name of Nadia Adams, sort of Fair Functions by Nadia. And she was documenting her being COVID positive and certainly some of the remedies. And I was reading this like a few days before, and I could see already even then how incredibly powerful her narrating her own story is or was, right? So when I did that, I saw, again, a repeat of the incredible power of the personal narrative. Because when you share your own story, you own the narrative. You're telling people what has happened to you, you're telling them what you're feeling, you're telling them the support you're getting, and they are learning from you. So when you don't share the story, there's a lot of murmuring, there's lots of gossip in the corridors in terms of what it is and how you're feeling, and you don't really know. So I'm not saying you absolutely must. I accept the fact that people watching me will choose not to tell their story, and that's fine too. But I'm also telling you, for those that are thinking about it, sharing is a healing for the COVID positive and the COVID negative as well. So think about your greater role in being a teacher, in educating other people around it, because I certainly learned from other people. And this is the point about impact, right? You see, not everybody will be COVID infected, but everybody will be COVID affected. I need to say that again. Not everybody will be COVID infected, but everybody around the world will be COVID affected. And you can work on how it affects you, and I'm sure it's affecting you even now, even if you are COVID negative. So once you understand that, you'll understand your greater role in being aware. Now, a couple of days after I was diagnosed as positive, within a day, in fact, my wife started showing some symptoms that suggested that she was COVID positive. So we then made a call, and she made the call to say she's going to make the assumption that she's positive and therefore will isolate from the rest of the family, but with me, so we could then spend the time in the same room. And a couple of days later, she went for a test as well, and yes, she was confirmed as COVID positive. So we were unusual compared to other people in the sense I was in isolation, but I was not isolated from the person closest to me, to my wife. We were isolated from the rest of my family, but we were together, spending 2 weeks in our bedroom together. And people have asked, like, what's it been like? So first of all, it's cool being with your spouse because you can talk about a lot of things. One of the things we did speak about, we spoke about our wills. We spoke about how updated are our wills, and they are, and to make sure that it is whatever is in the world is what reflects our wishes, because you never know what's going to happen. Because for many people, being COVID positive has meant a flu, a mild flu. For other people, a bit more severe. For others, maybe, a bit more complicated, but not critical. Others have been critical and required ventilators. And then others, very sadly, have succumbed to COVID-19 and they passed on. And we know how terrible that is to lose a life. Because yes, I know maybe only 2% of people in South Africa have died from COVID-19, those who are positive, and maybe it's 5% around the world. But I'll tell you what, when that 2% is your family, is your loved one, is someone close to you, you cannot be reassured by the numbers to say, but don't worry, it's only 2%. You as a husband or a wife or a parent or a son or a daughter, you will freak out because you want your family to be healthy and to be secure. Absolutely. So we had that conversation about what may well happen to us. Thank goodness both my wife and I were relatively, I would say we had the flu. And we have some odd niggles, but we've not had the biggest issue, which is we've not had chest problems and we've not had breathing problems, which is the one that puts you into a serious tailspin, and you know that, right? So we've been very, very grateful for that. The level of support, you know that phrase, that African phrase called Ubuntu, I am because you are, or I am because we are. Well, it absolutely came to the fore as well. The amount of people who rallied around us on the one hand, but also then provided physical support, from providing meals without us asking us, providing other things, providing information, sending us remedies, everything. And then from my core family, my children in our home, they had to play a big role. I mean, they're biggish kids, so they're not young, and that helped, right? And they were able to cook and learn how to cook when they didn't. They were able to provide all our needs and leave it at our front door the way, a jail warden would leave it when you're locked up in jail. It's like, here's your time for your odd meal. I mean, and that's really the scenario of what it is, right? The other part, and I want to punctuate this, so my wife and I were in isolation in a fairly large bedroom with an ensuite that had access to Wi-Fi, we were able to bring in a small table to put my laptop on there. So when people say, well, what was it like? I'm going to say this. This notion that COVID-19 strikes everybody equally is not true. Even in illness like COVID-19, there's a big difference between how it impacts on the super wealthy and the support they receive and the medical attention they receive, and the same for the middle class, and then, of course, for the poorest of the poor, meaning that it may harm us in the same way, but in many ways, the support you get is not equal for those different categories of people. So there's a tremendous disconnection, even in South Africa, where the poorest of the poor are and will remain the most vulnerable with regard to COVID-19, because if they need to go to hospital, their treatments are compromised. If they need to get ventilated, it's compromised. The sheer numbers suggest that. If they're going to be at home, they're compromised. They have smaller homes. They have less privacy. They can't really isolate, okay? So it is different. And that reflects this disparity between the haves and the haves not just in South Africa, but around the world as well. And something for you to just think about that, how is it we can be concerned about COVID-19 and then not look at the other social ills in our world beyond COVID-19? And then from a South African point of view, COVID-19 hasn't, and we know it's damaged the economy, many people out of jobs, thousands of people out of jobs. It has therefore damaged incomes. People are living on that poverty line. Everybody's poorer. Everybody's decidedly poorer today than they were 4 months ago, okay? But you have to ask yourself this, in terms of that point I made, that COVID-19 doesn't infect everybody, but does impact on everybody, right? That COVID-19 is also seen to destroy, or been seen as destroying, the infrastructure of South Africa. That's not quite true. Many parts of South Africa's infrastructure has been compromised and destroyed long before COVID-19. What COVID-19 has done is shown up just how damaged it has been. So how is it, for example, that millions of South Africans cannot have electricity? Many other people have portable toilets. The schools' toilets and the pit latrines. That's a shocking testimony to a democratic South Africa, 25 years and more into a democratic country, right? And then we look at the hospitals and the type of treatment. So COVID-19 hasn't damaged all of that, but it has actually showed it up for what it is. Incredible disparities. And the message, therefore, to government and to the president is like, how is it we can deliver a 2010 World Cup 10 years ago, a world-class, first-class 2010 World Cup, to convince the world that we're okay as a nation, but then we can't deliver what I call a personal World Cup to the 50, 60 million South Africans in this country, people who live here. You see, for many people, for them, the poverty-stricken, for them, the World Cup is not 32 teams playing football. Their World Cup is electricity. Their World Cup is good education. Their World Cup is access to clean water, to hot water. Their World Cup is access to good hospitals, to good treatment. That's their World Cup. So how is it we can succeed on one World Cup, but not on the other World Cup? And it does suggest a massive rethink in terms of the priorities of South Africa moving forward to a life beyond COVID-19, right? How do I feel now? I'm grateful that both myself and my wife are healthy. We're in reasonably good shape. We are anxious. We're anxious now because even doctors have said they don't quite know what's going to happen with COVID-19. Even for us, that means there are some niggling signs that they just don't go away. Like you get the odd not so much short breath, cold shivers that come and go. But overall, I think we are comfortable. Lots of questions still to ask for ourselves. Does it mean we can get reinfected? Does it mean we can reinfect others? I think the answer for now is no. What about the future? So we are COVID positive and we've recovered. What about our children? There's children, there's grandchildren, and there's extended members of families, or there's core families, extended family. What about all of them? And nobody can be like, Shap, I've got my COVID-19, I was fine, I'm okay. No, you can't. Not if you embrace I am because you are. Because everything is interconnected. So for example, when it came to China, you can't say that as long as China's got the problem, it's okay. It's not our problem. We would have known very quickly that it's contagious. And what's going to happen in China in this world of global travel will impact and spread around the world. So you can't say that you're living in your suburb and you're okay, but it doesn't matter because you're okay, but your wife and your children are not okay, or your husband is not okay, or you're okay, but your neighbors are not. They are all at risk. Or your suburb is okay, but your city is at risk. Or your city is okay, but your country is at risk. Every one of us remains at risk. So I'm anxious. I'm anxious even now, and I pray that we can absolutely flatten the curve. What was as a follower of the Islamic faith, we prayed to God, we prayed to Allah. We normally pray 5 times a day, so that was not a change from the system. But what I did in particular, there's a chapter from the Quran and the 2 verses from it that is particularly important. فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا إِنَّ مَعَ الْأُسْرِ يُسْرًا. In Arabic, the language of the Quran, and loosely translated, it means, surely after every difficulty comes relief. Surely after every difficulty comes relief. And what I found myself doing and saying in all that period, right, was that there will be relief. We have different ways of expressing our faiths, right? But whatever the faith that you have, you do need to hold on to something greater than you in your moment of trial. So for me, it was that after every difficulty comes relief. And I would strongly suggest that you hold on to that. It's not a blind faith. The blind faith is like, don't worry, just pray, go to big areas of congregations, churches, mosques, synagogues, whatever it is, temples, and just pray to God. He's going to sort you out. It doesn't work that way. It just does not work that way. I mean, there's a phrase from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he said, tie your camel and put your faith in God. Not put your faith in God, but leave your camel untied. So you have to make sure, even yourself now, that you are prepared, because I liken what has happened around COVID-19 to a storm. Initially, you were at a picnic. Think about this. You were at a picnic and it started drizzling. So all that was needed was a cap. It was sufficient to protect you. Then it started raining a lot more. So you needed an umbrella. But then the rain didn't stop. And it turned into a little bit more. So the umbrella with the rain jacket and the cap. But you were shivering away and trying to look for shelter. And then that rain moved into a fully blooded storm. In that case, the umbrella is not going to help. The cap is not going to help. The rain jacket is not going to help. Jumping in the car is not going to help. Not enough. You get out of that picnic area and you head to the protective safety of your home. The reality is we are in a COVID storm, and you need to find a way, in your own way, to head for safety. I'm Ashraf Garda, and that's my point.